All right, well, thank you everyone for joining me today. My name is Corbin Granger. I work with compliance at Town Benefits, and today we're going to be talking about the 1094 and 1095B reporting for 2023. This would apply to you if you were an employer that had a self-insured plan for one or more months in 2023, and it's called reporting minimum essential coverage. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Just a few housekeeping items. We do post the recordings online, and we also send everyone a copy of the slides afterwards. So anyone who registered, if they couldn't be here today, they will receive a copy of the slides, and we'll give you the link for how to access the online recording. So with that, we always give our disclaimer. This is for employers that had a self-insured plan for one or more months in 2023. So that would be, for example, an Anthem plan, an Optima plan, United Healthcare plan that was self-insured. Optima calls it Business Edge. Anthem calls it Balance Funding. And that you are not what we call an applicable large employer under ACA. If you are an applicable large employer under ACA, you would do this reporting under a different form, the 1094, 1095C. So this is intended to be informational and not legal, tax, or accounting advice. So we always recommend you talk with your professional if you have a specific situation. So in 2023, providing statements to individuals, and that's the 1095B, the due date for individual statements has been permanently extended to March 4th, 2024. Now, sometimes you might have employees ask you for it beforehand, simply because they're using it to file with their taxes, even though they're not required to have it for their taxes. Sometimes the tax professional will still ask for it. And filing with the IRS. So you send in the 1094B and the 1095B. The due date for filing electronically is March 31st, 2024. You will note I do not have a due date here for filing on paper. And the reason is electronic filing is required for entities that issue 10 or more tax returns in the year. And so that's what they call aggregate or total tax returns. So basically, there is no paper filing with the IRS. The instructions still refer to paper filing, but in order to get a hardship exemption for paper filing, you'd have to provide cost estimates. You have to actually provide a hardship. And I think what the IRS is saying is there's no paper filing. So you may want to utilize one of the filing services that's pretty simple to help file with the IRS. So what are we reporting? You're reporting what's called the minimum type of coverage that's qualifying coverage under the ACA. And again, if you were self-insured for one or more months in calendar year 2023. So even if your plan year started in November and December, you would be reporting in 2023, you would be reporting for those 2 months. You send the 1095B to what's called the responsible individual. That's generally going to be your employee. And the 1094B, along with all of the 1095Bs, are transmitted to the IRS. And just last reminder, if you're a large employer, you complete Part 3 of the 1095C to report this. So this is not intended for applicable large employers. It's actually really quite simple. So reporting health reimbursement arrangements. So if you happen to have what's called an individual coverage HRA or an ICRA, that is considered a self-insured plan, and the employer must report covered individuals under the ICRA. If you have employees, so you have a self-insured medical plan, but you also have an HRA, you only report for the insurance coverage, meaning you don't have to report for the HRA. They're both considered self-insured plans, and if they mirror each other in plan year, etc., you don't have to report that separately. There is a long explanation at the bottom here that I've actually never run into in my career, but I do have to mention it, which is, let's say you as an employer sponsor an HRA, only because the people covered by the HRA are covered by a different group health plan by another employer. If that was the case, then each employer reports that employee is covered by the HRA. Again, the only HRAs I've ever seen are you participate in the HRA if you're a member of the employer's plan. So that's incredibly rare. There are state filings required now for individual mandates. So New Jersey, Vermont, Washington, D.C., California, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. And so what this means is if you have employees in these states, there may be additional payroll tax filings that you as an employer may need to do if you have employees in those states. So what are we reporting? We aren't reporting necessarily just employees. We're reporting what's called covered individuals. So you're going to be reporting employees, spouses, and dependents, and each month covered for that individual. One day counts for an entire month on the 1095B. Now, most of the time, coverage starts and ends at the first day of the month, but let's say someone has a baby, it's going to start the day the baby was born. So that's an example of one day or a couple of days counting for an entire month. You do report with the Social Security number of each covered individual. You can use what they call a truncated Social Security number, taxpayer identification number on the 1095B provided to the responsible individual, but not on the 1095B filed with the IRS. So you might as well just don't truncate the socials, just provide them. So here is the 1094B. It's very, very simple. Again, you'd be filing this electronically. So in the program, you would input the filer's name, who contact, the street address. You always want to do your 1095Bs first, because if you see here, number 9, it says total number of forms 1095B submitted with this transmittal. So you're going to do the 1095Bs first so you can input how many 1095Bs you have. And then, of course, you would be e-filing it. The 1095B is actually comprised of 4 parts. So you've got part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4. Part 1 is for the responsible individual, and that's really going to be your employee unless someone happens to be on COBRA or state continuation. So you may have, so in other words, you have an employee who's covering their entire family. You only issue the 1095B to the employee. And so if they're covering a child who's under 26, but they're filing their own taxes, that individual can provide a copy of that 1095B to their child. Part 2 is information about certain employer-sponsored coverage, and in certain cases that will be skipped. And then part 3 is the insurer or other coverage provider. And then part 4, which I don't believe we see on this slide, is where you list the covered individuals. So let's go through part 1 first, lines 1 through 7. I know it is a little bit small, but you indicate the person's name, their social. You do not put in line 3 a date of birth. That only applies if the Social Security number or tax identification number is not available. And really that should never be the case. Hopefully you would have a Social Security number or tax ID number for anyone who is the responsible individual. And then their street address, city, town, state. So let's go to the next slide. So under line 8, it says enter letter identifying origin of the health coverage. So these are the instructions, and you're going to put a B for employer-sponsored coverage, unless you're offering what we call an ICHRA, individual coverage HRA, and that will be a G. But I imagine the majority would put code B on line 8. So under part 2, self-insured employer group health plans, if you entered a B, you skip part 2. So yes, I'm saying that correctly because you are the issuer of the coverage. So if you put a B, you skip part 2, and then we're going to go to part 3. So under part 3, you put your information as the employer as the coverage provider. So you would put your name, your employer identification number, contact telephone number, street address, city, state, country, and zip code. And again, this would all be done electronically when you're filing it with the IRS. Under part 4, you're going to list the covered individuals. So you have the responsible individual under part 1, but you also have to put that person down under part 4 because they are also covered under the plan. So basically what I mean is your employee, who is the reason that the dependents have coverage, will be listed under covered individuals. You'll put their first name, middle initial, last name, their social security number or taxpayer identification number. And again, in C, you only put a date of birth if there is nothing to put in column B. So if there is no social or taxpayer identification number. So if the individual was not covered for all 12 months, then you list every month the individual was covered for at least one day in the month. So there is a covered all 12 month box, and then you can choose the months of coverage. So for example, let's say you had a non-calendar year plan and you were fully insured from January through June of 2023. And then in July of 2023, you move to Anthem balance funding. Then you're going to click for everyone who was covered from July through December. You're going to check those individual boxes. So it's very simple reporting. I think the big takeaway this year is that we all are required to e-file. And I know this is one of our shorter webinars. And so now I'm going to go ahead and open it up to any questions. Go ahead and stop the screen share, see if anybody has any questions. All right, well, I hope this has been helpful. It really is a privilege and an honor to be of service to all of you. And thank you so much for taking your time today. If you have any questions or concerns when you're trying to complete these forms, please feel free to reach out to your broker or to me directly. And I wish you and yours a very wonderful Thanksgiving. Thank you so much and have a great afternoon.